Hello everyone, my name is Екатерina Gubkova. I am a fellow researcher at Central of Macroeconomic Research at the Financial Research Institute of Russian Ministry of Finance. And this is our project FRI TALK, where we talk to our colleagues all over the world about what is happening in the economy in the moment. And today our guest is Mario Chatер, an analyst at Statistics and Economic Research Department at Central Bank of Lebanon. Mario, hello.
Hi, Katya. Hi, everybody. How are you?
Yeah, we're good, but it's isolated a little bit.
Yeah, same here.
Yes. So before we start, around a month ago, I was checking how is the situation with coronavirus outbreak develops in different countries, and I checked Lebanon. And at that time, a number of revealed cases in your country was slightly higher than that in Russia. But unfortunately now the situation in Russia got worse. Now we have on average 4,000 more revealed cases per day, which is quite sad. What about Lebanon? How is the situation with corona in your country?
Well, right now in Lebanon, I think that the number of infected people is it's less than 1,000. I think it's around between 600 and 700 people. In terms of death, the death toll is still below 50. So actually, the numbers compared to other countries, they're relatively good. The thing is that the government took curfew measures very early. So we had only 3 cases in Lebanon and schools got closed. And so for instance, now even for cars, when you want to circulate in the country, half of the week, only cars with an odd number plate can circulate, while for the other days of the week, you need to have an even car plate. So yeah, I mean, and even I think after 7 p.m., you can no longer leave home unless you have an authorization, unless you're a doctor, a nurse, somebody working in the medical field.
So it was a national emergency declared, right?
Yes, absolutely. The thing is, we have many levels of national emergency. I think now it's not the highest one. The highest one, maybe the army takes control of the situation. Here we are 1 degree below. But yeah, exactly. It's de facto, it's an emergency situation.
I see. Well, looks like the situation was taken under control at the right time, which is good.
Yes, it is. It is. Maybe one reason which explains that is that the government doesn't have enough resources right now. So maybe they decided to take things very early, to take the measures very early. So better prevent than to cure, because curing is much more expensive than preventing.
I see. Yes, that's pretty good. And I know that many Lebanese people live outside the country, and now was there a tendency of them going back to reunite with their families?
So yeah, exactly. The Lebanese diaspora is really huge. I would say that the government, they did provide a service for Lebanese to come back to Lebanon. And this is done at the expense of the person coming back. The government is not paying for that, but they did provide the service. The thing is that the choice of people, it really depends on the places where they are and their occupations. So for instance, students who were in Europe and essentially in France and Italy, even in England, most of them decided to come back to Lebanon. Lebanese were in Africa, no matter what their occupation is, they decided to come back. But Lebanese who live in places which are more far, like in the US, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, they decided to stay there. And as for like displacements within Lebanon, so people, some people decided to leave the big cities and go to the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that even the countryside, it's been hit as much as the cities. The thing is, we know what we have noticed is that people living in villages, they tend to visit each other a lot and do some visits. So the thing is, it's harder for the virus to get in, but once it's there, then it propagates really easily among all people living in the village. And that's what happened in one of the villages, which concentrates like maybe 10% of all cases in Lebanon. And the village got locked down because of that. Yeah.
I see. Wow, I wouldn't expect that people in villages would interact more closely, more intensively than how they do it in a big city. But of course, it's good to be friendly, but maybe not in times of coronavirus outbreak.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about economics. As you may know, what is happening in the world right now was recently called the Great Lockdown. The experts expect the worst downturn in the global economy since the Great Depression. And what about Lebanese economy? In terms of GDP growth for Lebanon, what do you expect? What are the predictions that you check up with, or maybe the Central Bank of Lebanon has some official estimates?
So the thing about the Lebanese economy is that we were, even before Corona, we were going through a very significant recession. It's actually the worst recession since the end of the Civil War in the 90s. So the main reason for that is actually growth was above 5%. It was at around 7% per year before 2011. After the start of the Syrian war, it went down to 0%. So some years +1, +2, 0%. And in the last 2 years, maybe it's due to the accumulation, the saturation of the Lebanese infrastructure, the impact of the crisis on the country. So inflow of money really decreased a lot in the last decade due to the Syrian crisis. So due to that, we were heading towards a deep recession, and it kind of started last year. So including the Corona came and made the situation even worse. So the latest IMF projection for growth is that there's a recession, a double digits recession. So more than 10% recession per year. It's huge.
Yes, that's very severe. And for Russian economy, IMF predicts minus 5.5, which is still pretty tough, but not as much as in Lebanon. As far as I know, recently Lebanon experienced the default on public debt, which could explain also the estimate of IMF. Yeah. Could you tell us if the default was triggered by coronavirus outbreak or it happened before?
Yes, so it happened before. The rumors about default, they happened way like maybe in mid 2019, so way before where people talked about Corona and the threat really appeared. And the official default happened on the 9th of March. So yeah, it was. There's no link between the default and Corona. The default happened before.
I see. So I guess it makes implementing expansionary fiscal policy a difficult task, right? What does the government do under these circumstances?
So exactly. The thing is, when you default, like in order to restructure that, you're kind of required to do some fiscal consolidation, and that's what the plan was, and what it still is. And the thing is that Corona really came at the bad time, where actually government money is needed to help to improve the situation. So the thing is that, in consultation with the central bank, so the government decided to implement some policies to help against the effects of Corona. So one of them is for employees who earn less than 3 million Lebanese pounds, which is equivalent to $1,000. Well, their salaries, they get a bonus of 50% to their salaries. And then also in terms of loan repayments, so if you have to pay a loan, a subsidized long-term loan, for instance, for housing, well, for you're being for the repayment for interest and principal, for the month of April has been postponed for 5 years. So to be clear, it's just the month of April. So you still have to pay for the month of May, June, July, and so on. Unless, I mean, the measure gets extended for other months. But the thing is, yeah, it's really hard to inject some money to fight Corona and at the same time implement some structural reforms that are much needed.
I see. Yes, that's true. Well, you mentioned the measure about postponing payments on loans. In Russia, we have a similar law. The payments on loans are to be postponed up to 6 months for borrowers whose income went down by 30%. Mm-hmm. Well, looks like coronavirus came at a very bad time for Lebanon. But maybe on a monetary policy side, there are some expansionary measures.
So, well, due to the recession, indeed, the central bank decided to adopt some expansionary measures. The thing is, we were absorbing liquidity up to 2019 in order to counter inflation, which was quite high. But now, due to the big recession, well, the central bank decided to ease a little bit the constraints. So, for example, we noticed that interest rates on deposits in dollars, they went down from 6-7% in September towards 3-4% in January, February 2020. Yeah.
I see. So it's on deposits in dollars, and what about deposits in Lebanese pounds?
So we have deposits in both currencies. For instance, the interest rate is the same up to a risk premium of more or less 3-4 percentage points. And yeah, exactly. The thing, the dollarization rate in Lebanon is quite high. So it's around 80%.
I see. So the decrease in the rate for deposits in Lebanese pounds, it was like the similar as the fall in rate in dollars. Okay.
Maybe from close to 10% to now closer to 6-7%. Yeah, absolutely.
I see. Well, in Russia, there are some signals that maybe central bank will decrease its key interest rate as well, because now people they don't expect that people will spend a lot of money, so demand is expected to go down. Okay, so it's an interesting case, a difficult one for Lebanon, but it's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. I hope that economy in Lebanon will start to recover at some point in the future. And speaking of future, what do you think will happen in the global economy and in Lebanese economy in short-term perspective and in a longer term? Will the economy go back to its pre-crisis growth path, or everything will be changed for good?
Well, these are really a lot of questions. So let's start with Lebanon first. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, in Lebanon, unfortunately, we have a lot of uncertainty because we are in the Middle East and due to the conflicts around us. So really, there's a lot of uncertainty. So our future will depend also on how the Syrian crisis is resolved in the future. Also, obviously, it also will depend on the restructuring of the domestic debt, of the Lebanese debt. So if the government is able to do a soft landing, well, we can expect to recover quite fast. But if the circumstances doesn't help us to do that, it can be harder. Well, that's for Lebanon. As for the world, I think that Corona, it's a very, we're being tested by Corona, like as mankind in general. So what we notice is that we are really badly prepared to handle a global threat like a pandemic. Really badly prepared. The thing is, I think that the world will witness some structural changes. So first, in terms of the global supply chain, this will change. I mean, the crisis showed us that the way we have decided to implement factories and so on, and particularly our reliance on some regions of the world to do that, well, this is not sustainable for the future. So we will witness a lot of changes in that field. Maybe countries will start to produce more locally, especially essential items. So companies which are not flexible enough to adapt to this new reality, well, they'll be replaced by companies which are more flexible. And as for global governance, I think that maybe entities such as the WHO or another entity, they will be more empowered and have more authority and resources to deal with such situations in the future. I mean, what we notice is not a complete, but a partial lack of coordination between countries. There's no global leader. Maybe we will witness the emergence of a global entity which will coordinate the humans' response to such threats.
Yes, I can imagine that. It seems very possible. Well, so now it's going to be our last question, and let's finish it at a positive attitude. Mm-hmm. Considering what is happening with the world right now, how to stay positive, how to stay calm and productive in this period? What are your tips?
Well, it's the hardest question you ask me. I'm joking. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all now going through a forced, completely new experience, which is the one of staying at home for a long period of time, isolated from the outside world. I think that, I mean, since we are forced, then we should do our best to, let's say, profit from the situation. So, for instance, there were many days in the past where I said, oh, if only the day was 60 hours long, so I can read this book that I wanted to read, I can improve that skill, play an instrument more. Well, this time has come. It's exactly now. That's the time where I can improve that. I know it's hard, it requires a lot of discipline, but I think that if we are able to discipline ourselves and get motivated and invest in some skills, I think we can learn a lot from this period and get ready for the next Corona.
Yes, thank you, Mario. It's a great message. I hope our viewers will follow it and we all will become a better society with better skills.
Yeah. Thank you, Katya. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mario, for such an interesting discussion. It was a pleasure to have you as our guest at our project FRI TALK. I wish all the best for Lebanon to fight the epidemic and to recover from the crisis as soon as possible.
Thank you. Same for you.
Thank you. Goodbye, Mario.
Goodbye.